Well, hey, Pathway, welcome to the podcast. My name is Brian Bennett. I'm the lead pastor, and it is just a different episode, a different approach today. We're here with Hannah Bologna, and she has an amazing testimony. And around once a month, we wanted to pause kind of what we've been doing with the podcast to just share a really cool God at work story. And so how are you doing today, Hannah?
I'm good. Thanks for having me over.
Yeah, no, we're so excited to give you a little bit of background because we're going to dive deep on Hannah's story today. And that's really our heart behind this podcast is digging deeper to build a bigger people in Christ. And so as we do this today, Hannah is a young adult, which, you look and you go, just even a minute ago, I'm asking you, how long have you been an HR professional? And you've been doing it 8 years, which is absolutely amazing. Has her master's degree, is married to her incredible husband, Joe, who's a local law enforcement officer at one of our schools, and they have a newborn. And
We do.
yeah, so that'll be a part of the story. So I just want to give you a little bit of context to understand kind of where Hannah's at in life, and then we're going to dive right into her story because it is so rich. And she came to me in the spring and just felt God tugging her to share that. Then she had her child, and so it's taken some time, but here we are. So it's going to be good. So Hannah, let's dive right in. Can you tell us a little bit about your earlier years, childhood years, and a pivotal moment when you were first introduced to faith and to God?
Yes. So my whole biological immediate family has passed away from a heart condition that's genetic. And so I have a dad. He's wonderful. He's raised me ever since I was a little baby. But I always knew that there were some issues there. So my upbringing was a little bit different just because I had to be more careful. We didn't know kind of what it was. But I remember when I was in second grade, my best friend at the time, her name was Emily. Her dad was a pastor, and he had come to have lunch with her at school. And we sat down, and they prayed, and I was like, oh, I don't really know what that is. And so I started asking questions like a curious second grader,
Yeah.
and they told me all about God. And she just so happened to have one of his business cards in her lunchbox. And so I brought it home, and I was like, Mom, Dad, I really want to go. So we did. We started going to church, and that led to kind of where we are today.
Yeah, that's amazing. We talk a lot around Pathway about your plus one, and I'm just thinking, for that pastor, does he know that those lunches led to you finding?
I don't know. I know my friend Emily. She does. We've talked about it
Okay.
a few times over the years, just sporadically. But I'm not sure if he does. I should reach out to him.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think for all of us, it's just that reminder, whether it's a pastor having lunch with his daughter or a second grader with a business card at her lunch, you just don't know how God's going to work. And yeah, that's really neat. So you take that invite and you talk to your family. What was that like when your family began going to church for the first time? What do you remember about that at such a young age?
I remember it was a little bit different at first, just because it wasn't something that we were used to. But we kind of dove in really quickly. Got very involved with the church. It was a lot of fun. My dad would help kind of fix things around the church or build things. And then eventually, as I got a little bit older, I even helped with Sunday school and things like that. So it kind of just evolved, and we were regulars. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's great. That's often how it happens, right? We put our toes in the water, we keep walking, and before long, we're swimming as God has moved, and that's great. So in there somewhere, you made a decision to receive Jesus.
Yes.
And you were baptized. Tell us about that.
I was 10 years old, and it was on Easter Sunday. I remember just sitting in Sunday school, and the teacher kind of telling me, what our message was, and it all just kind of clicked. And I was like, okay. And so they were talking about baptisms for our children's church, and I went and saw the pastor that baptized me. His name was Pastor Tim, and I saw Pastor Tim, and I just said, I want to be baptized. And, he went through, and we had the conversation of, do you know what it really means to be baptized, and all of that. And it was just, I remember it was so much fun, and I was so nervous getting up in front of the church, but then afterwards it felt like a huge relief.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of fun, too.
That's awesome. I'm curious, at that age, did they have you share anything, or did they do it for you?
They did it for us.
Yeah.
They did.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's great. Well, I mentioned plus one a minute ago. Another would be just baptism. So for those of you watching and listening, that's always the next step with Jesus, right? We come to Christ and then we get baptized. So something to think about no matter your age. For you, as you make that decision and you begin to, through baptism, declare that you're following Jesus, uh, you said you're around 10 or so, and now you begin to experience some significant health challenges.
Yes.
Tell us about, because you mentioned earlier your family history, so
Hmm.
give us a little bit of that, and then what did you begin to face at such a young age?
Yes. So I was about 14. And like I said, we knew I had something, but we didn't really know what it was. And I started to get very dizzy and have very like heavy and tight chest pains. And so it was a little concerning. So we had gone, to the emergency room a few times when it happened. And there was at one point where we went to the emergency room here in our hometown, and they ended up having to take us down to West Palm Beach, where I spent quite some time down there. I believe it was a few weeks, and they had run a bunch of tests, done a bunch of scans, and we left without really knowing what the answers were. We just know that I was starting to feel a little bit better. And it wasn't until much later where I actually found out kind of what was going on.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute, but so you're in your teen years now, and you've
Yes.
got this relationship with Jesus, and I think so often we think when we have that, everything's going to be great and perfect, right?
Oh,
And,
yeah.
and here you are as a teenager, probably with a lot of questions. What was it like for you, just physically, emotionally? Do you remember some of what you were feeling and going through?
Yes, I do remember just thinking like, well, I don't understand why this is happening to me, or questioning, well, if God is good, why can't He just fix it right away? And it really kind of made me dive deeper to try to understand why things happen, or come to the realization that even though things happen, God's still good, because
Hmm.
if it's not good, He's not done. And so
Wow.
it was kind of that realization for me.
Yeah.
And it was hard. It was not easy. I mean, you're laying there, you're not feeling well, you're being poked and prodded because they're trying to figure out what's going on, and
Yeah.
then not have answers. You certainly question it for sure.
Yeah, I love that line you just said. God is good, and if it's not good, He's not done.
Yes.
Yeah, that is. Hopefully, everybody caught that, because that is, yeah, so true. God is good, and yet sometimes we go through difficulties and challenges. And in your teen years, this was significant, obviously, and we'll come back
Yes.
to kind of what God's done through that. But this wasn't the only challenge in your teen years.
Correct.
Yeah, there were some changes in your family, and tell us a little bit about that, kind of,
Yes.
because I think, unfortunately, statistically, many people have gone through the same thing your family went through. So,
Yes. So my mom and dad got divorced, which was, right around the same time that I was experiencing all of the issues. And again, I just started questioning God, like, I don't understand. Why is this happening? What do we do? And then with that, we stopped going to church as often. And it was hard because church was kind of my stress-free zone for a while.
yeah,
And I wasn't old enough to drive yet. And, we had moved down south a little bit. And so that was a huge adjustment. And I got kind of angry with God because everything started kind of piling up. And
yeah.
I felt like I was just kind of being attacked from every end. But again, he wasn't done. And so,
I mean, you're more than like 10 years later on that now,
right.
but I mean, just I can't imagine what it was like in the moment.
Yes, it
Because,
was hard. It was really, really hard. I'm not going to lie.
yeah, yeah. You mentioned something important there, too, I think, for all of us to remember that, often you said church was kind of like your safe place.
Hmm.
And there was an element of consistency in that and
Yes.
stability. And I think that is, for many, what church is meant to be, right? It's not just a building, it's not just a place, but a people where
Absolutely.
we can lean in. And the fact that you can look back and see that the absence of that affected you as a
Oh, of
teenager.
course.
Yeah, if you're younger, hopefully you can realize your need for it. If you're older and have kids, yeah, hopefully it's a little bit of a wake-up call of how much this matters.
Yes.
Tell me about, as you're getting angry with God, just how did you work through that in those teen years in your relationship with
Right.
him? What do you remember?
Honestly, I don't think I fully did until much later,
Yeah,
but I kind of distanced myself a little bit because I think I was so angry. Instead of trying to dive deeper, I kind of backed off.
sure.
I, obviously didn't get into the word as much.
Hmm.
And as a teenager, you're so influential. You kind of go with more of like what's mainstream. And
Yeah.
so I didn't really go to church as much, didn't really get into the word as much, didn't listen to praise and worship. And so I kind of backed off. I mean, when I was going through something, I would still pray, but it wasn't consistent and it wasn't
Hmm.
daily. And so I can definitely look back and see it. That's kind of where I veered off the path a little bit.
Sure, yeah. And so as you're waiting for the doctors to diagnose the condition and to provide some answers as you're working through what your parents are going through, yeah, I mean, that is a difficult season, no
Yes.
doubt. There was a turning point that came later when the diagnosis came. Give
Yes.
us the diagnosis. How did they figure out what it was?
So,
And yeah,
so I went to many, many different cardiologists. Nobody could really figure out what it was. I remember, fast forward a little bit, I got married to my husband and I moved across the country, and so I went and got a file from one of my doctors with all the notes and stuff, so that
right.
when went to see a new doctor, I had all of that information already with me. And you could see in the notes it was just like, well, she's excited or she's nervous, and that was kind of what they were thinking my chest pain was because they couldn't find any answers. But I ended up taking my biological father's autopsy and my aunt's autopsy, and then all of the notes and all of the scans with me to a doctor up in New York. And she was like, I think you really need to go see a specialist. I'm going to send you to the University of Rochester. And I was like, okay. So I went there. I saw a doctor. They did, a stress test. And they were like, we're just going to try one more thing. We have one more idea. And I was like, okay. And they ran a few EKGs and things of
Mm.
that nature. And what we had been looking for was a structural issue, and it turned out to be an electrical issue.
Wow.
And so we had been looking at the wrong thing the entire time. And my heart
Mm.
condition is actually not very common as well, so a lot of people don't think to look for it. And so I was 21 when I finally got a diagnosis. It was
Wow.
literally a month after I had turned 21. And they started me on a beta blocker right away and started doing testing to see if I needed a pacemaker defibrillator. So,
Wow. So 21 years old. Again, just amazing for me to look at that and go, like, just even the wisdom to grab as hard as that must have been to grab autopsy reports
right.
and to continue to walk out that journey. Proverbs 16:9 says that, God directs our steps, He orders our steps. And even though you maybe at some level felt angry or estranged from God, somehow, some way, He was still ordering your steps. I
Yes, he
mean,
was, for sure.
yeah. So you get that diagnosis. What in that moment did that feel like for you? When did you, from that moment, begin to re-engage, I guess, with a little
Sure.
deeper with God, and then what was it even like for your family dynamics?
Sure. I think there was a little bit of a relief that we finally knew kind of what was going on, but it was also so scary because it was something completely different than what we had thought.
Yeah.
And, being put on a beta blocker so young, I was scared, I guess you would say, because now this is something that I have to take for the rest of my life.
Mm,
And at 21 years old, you're like, this is going to be a long time.
yeah.
And so with that, I think I was just trying to kind of hold on to the hope that we had found something, that we got answers, and that it wouldn't be what had happened to my family members. Just because, I mean, my father was 25 and his sister was 16. And so here I am at 21, kind of right in between those two ages,
Wow.
trying to kind of understand and get answers to prevent having the same outcome. So it was relief, but it was also a little bit nerve wracking to kind of say, okay,
Absolutely.
this is what I have. And it kind of changed everything.
Mm,
You can't even take Benadryl. And so
wow.
it kind of is a huge life change, but it was kind of good and bad at the same time.
Yeah. 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 I can't imagine. Like you said, just both the relief of knowing, but the
Yes.
anticipation, and then, like you said, I mean, you're between the ages.
Yes.
That this has affected literally loss of life with family. So, when did you begin to just re-engage with God in that journey? Was it during this period of time? Because we're not done.
Right.
You're going to face some more challenges. We're going to get to that in a
Yes.
minute. But when did you begin to? Around 21, you get the diagnosis. Was that about the time that you began to re-engage, or?
Yes. So my diagnosis was April, May of 2020. And then in November of 2020, I started having issues again. And we thought it was just another routine, oh, we need to go get checked out kind of thing. So we did. And I remember going into the emergency room thinking, oh, we'll be right back out. My husband had our dog in the car with us because he wasn't allowed to go in during COVID times. And they looked at me and they said, we're going to keep you overnight. And we want to run a few more tests. And I was like, okay. So I texted my husband. He ran home, grabbed a change of clothes and a phone charger for me. And then the next morning they came in and they said, we're going to put a pacemaker defibrillator in you. I was like, oh, okay. And so that brought its own set of challenges, but it wasn't really until that time where I kind of was like, oh my gosh, this is really happening, and kind of had to lean into my relationship with Jesus and just say, I can't do this on my own, and I really need your help to get through this, because that was scary.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I can't imagine. And you mentioned COVID. I mean, all this is unfolding during that period of time
Yes.
in 2020, which, regardless of where you lived in the country, regardless of how COVID may have affected you, we all were living with something new that we didn't understand, that created anxiety, and you're walking through this at that time. So God begins to re-engage, as you said. You begin to re-engage with Him. He was there the whole
Yes, he
time.
was.
Yeah, but you begin to, as that unfolds, your husband Joe is there. You guys are beginning to walk through that, and then you also then, as a family, we're going to jump ahead a little, begin to sense it's maybe time for a child.
Yes. So we went through my heart surgeries, which had significant issues. I'm sure we'll get into that in just a minute. But shortly after that, we found out that I had had a miscarriage. We didn't know that I was pregnant when we had our first one, and it was a little bit. I would say like nerve wracking, because here I was, it was only, a short bit after my heart surgeries. And I was at the doctor and they were like, yeah, you're having a miscarriage. They thought I was around 12 weeks. And I was angry again because here I didn't know. And so I couldn't even have the joy of knowing when I was pregnant. And so then I started to kind of get a little bit upset again and kind of say, well, what really is going on? You're taking me through the ringer here, and I don't quite understand why.
Yeah, yeah. So as that's unfolding, so again, more challenges, more
Yes.
difficulties. Just walk us through, because we're sitting in a room right now recording, and
Yes.
your little one is here,
She is.
and she's being amazing, right? And so tell us about her,
Okay.
but there's a lot that, fill in the
Okay.
gaps of what
So,
unfolded and how God worked
yes.
through that, because the joy that you have right now is so awesome.
So, when I had my heart surgeries, I ended up having 6 surgeries in a matter of 3 weeks. So, what had happened is the wire of my pacemaker came out of the wall of my heart and had flipped and it was touching my nerves. And it was not sensing my heartbeats correctly, so it was firing. So, basically, for lack of a better way to describe it, is I was being electrocuted throughout my entire body. And I was in the ICU for about 3 days before they actually figured out what it was. And from that, there was a lot of trauma. And so that's kind of where the subsequent surgeries came from. And it was very hard. I remember I was laying in the hospital bed. At this point, they wouldn't let my husband come in. And I'm 21 going in and out of heart surgery by myself. We were across the country. My whole family's down here in Florida. We were up in, upstate New York. And, it's COVID, so they couldn't
Yeah.
even come up there. So my husband's home alone. I'm in the hospital alone. All of our family's down here. And I remember just kind of feeling defeated. And I had a wallpaper on my phone of a Bible verse, and it was basically talking about, "Oh God, you've been so good to me." And I remember going, I'm in a hospital bed and I've got a lot of issues going on, health wise, but I'm still here. And I've got a really great medical staff that's working to help resolve these. And, I could have, when I had gone into the emergency room, I was in AFib, I could have died right then and there, but I didn't. And so I kind of had to realized that the enemy was trying to push all of these negative thoughts into my head to distract me of what God was actually doing, which was sitting right there beside me.
Yeah.
And so I was just sitting there, and I remember being in so much pain, and I just closed my eyes to pray for the first time in a very long time, and I was just like, God, I know you're here, and I need you. I can't do this by myself. I'm in pain. I need your help. And it was kind of just like a wave of relief. I hadn't been able to sleep from the pain. I actually wasn't able to eat, so the beds were inflatable to prevent bed sores from the elderly patients having to be in them so long. And I was actually seasick from the inflatable beds, and I wasn't able to sleep, eat. And
Wow.
after this prayer, I remember just being able to take like a very good deep nap, and I was able to start eating and kind of really see the turn of where I was able to
Wow.
start healing and feeling better. It sounds crazy, but I truly believe that that's what it was. Um, and so from there, I finally, after the 3 weeks, get out of the hospital. I'm able to go home. It was a very long recovery from there, just on the restrictions and trying to get used to having this, foreign object in your body. But then that's when I had the miscarriage. And that was a struggle, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
And, a lot of things happened, from there to now. We moved back home, and about, I'd say, 2 years later, we found out that I was pregnant again. And we were so excited. And, I was very sick. And, we thought, oh, it's just the, the first trimester. And so we kind of brushed it off for a while. And then it got to the point where my pacemaker was starting to fire because I was so sick. My heart rate was getting so high. And so I was like, I'm just going to go get checked out. Maybe they can give me something, because between being pregnant and the heart medication, I didn't really know what was safe to take. And we went to the emergency room, and they said, you are having a molar pregnancy. So basically, what we thought was a baby was actually a tumor. And so that was
Wow.
another loss where I was like, I don't understand. I've done everything I was supposed to do. I'm back in touch with God. I'm going to church. I'm, reading my Bible. And so that was a very tough thing to go through as well. But again, he wasn't done. And so it was like one thing after another. And then in October of last year, about a year ago today, we found out I was pregnant again. And I was
Wow.
so excited. And, I was like, we're not going to tell anybody until we get the ultrasound this time. And so our parents didn't know for a while. We went to the ultrasound, and we had a baby. And so I remember praying and being like, okay, God, like I trust you. This is going to happen if it's your will. And because I was so high risk with my heart and just the history, I started seeing a maternal fetal medicine doctor. And at about 25 weeks, he brought me into his office, and he said, you need to be prepared to deliver any day. And I was like, oh my God, maybe I'm just not fit to be a mother. At this point, I was like,
Wow.
maybe I'm not, maybe this is what I'm supposed to do. And so I started questioning it again, and my wallpaper again was on my phone, and I saw it, and I was like, nope, nope, we're not getting into this. And so basically, she was having a growth restriction, and her body was starting to allocate the nutrients that it did get to the parts of her body that she needed to survive. And so parts of her body were growing, but the other parts were still underdeveloped. And so we were worried that she was going to have to come sooner so that her body didn't start to shut down the organs that it was also trying to grow.
Wow.
But by the grace of God, she is here, and she made it until 37 weeks. When she was born, she still was very little. She was
Yeah.
4 pounds, 13 ounces, so a teeny tiny little baby.
Yeah.
But she didn't spend a single day in the NICU.
Wow.
And so she's here.
That's awesome. So for those watching on YouTube, we have a picture. We're gonna we'll hopefully be able to show you. She's gorgeous,
Thank you.
beautiful baby. You and Joe, I know, are so proud. And there's so many moments in your story that is why we wanted to share it in this little bit of a longer form, because you mentioned your wallpaper, which is a
Yes.
verse. So you've got God's word when you're digging deeper in these hard moments that's encouraging you. And that's often how God works, is he'll give us a promise. He'll give us something that when we hold on by faith, and you have such a journey of faith at such a young age that is just absolutely incredible. There's also part of your story that I thought was really interesting that many probably can relate to, which is just the role of worship and music.
Yes.
And you call it your feel good playlist.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about this feel good playlist that also has helped you through the hard times.
Yes. So I have a little playlist on my phone, and anytime I listen to a new worship song, whether it's here or on the radio that I like, I just add it. It's literally called Feel Good.
Love it.
And so it's got a few different things on it. And I remember, as I'm driving to the ultrasound appointments, it was down in West Palm Beach, so it was an hour drive to and from. And I used to have to go every week. And so I would turn it on because I'm like, okay, if I'm in the right mindset, she's feeling what I'm feeling, so I want it to be happy. And so I had the songs like God Problems and Not
Yeah.
Afraid, Graves into Gardens. Those were kind of my main staples on the playlist that I would play and listen to over and over. And then it led me to kind of where I am, to have my living proof of a loving God. So she's
Amen.
here.
I love that. You're living proof of a loving God.
Yes.
That is a great place for us to end your God at work, because God is alive and active in our world. He has been so alive and active in your world
Yes.
through all these ups and downs. And so, yeah, living proof of a loving God. I love that. So thank you so much for
Oh, yes.
your heart and your willingness to share your story. Obviously, you have seen Jesus do some things that many will never have to experience because of the unique nature, and you're giving him the glory.
Yes.
And so, we are just thrilled that you're a part of Pathway, and excited to share this with others. For those of you that are watching or listening, whether it's on YouTube, Apple, or Spotify, just want to encourage you, please like, follow, share, subscribe, all the things. And who do you know that Hannah's story would encourage? And think about sending it to them as a way in the middle of whatever challenges others might face, for them to know that God is a loving God, and she's living proof of that.
Yes.
So thank you again for being with us
Of
today.
course. Thank you for having me.